Mhm. Hi, everyone. We should be hopefully getting started in just a few more minutes. I'm going to give it like 2 or 3 more minutes for everyone to join in. Okay, so I don't think anybody else is going to be joining. So let's go ahead and get started. I see 2 members of the community board, Nellie and Matthew, and members of the committee. So I believe we should have quorum. On the agenda for today is mainly just the discussion of the 960 Franklin rezoning. In terms of old business, the resolution opposing the closure of the Associated Supermarket was approved by the full board. And so let's go ahead and move on to the 960 Franklin rezoning and its impact on particularly on housing. Just to give a broad overview, I created a quick presentation that shouldn't take more than 15 minutes. It just kind of goes over some of the key details and facts of what the affordability means and what the developers intend to do. For simplicity's sake, I used the facts and figures developed in their actual certified plans. If anyone didn't attend the presentation by the developers last week, there's actually a second proposed plan that's a compromise that would lower it from, I believe, 37 floors to 17 floors. But that's not what's before the community board, and that's not what's been certified by the city. So I'm going solely by what's before us in the certification. So I will go ahead and open up the presentation. Before I get started, does anybody have any immediate questions right now?
None here.
Okay.
Alexandra, this is Leslie.
Yeah.
I tried to attend the presentation, and because I was in a meeting that ended like a couple minutes, after the presentation was supposed to begin, I ran up to it. I think I ran into the limitations of the number of people who can come to a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And I'm wondering if that for the presentation for the developers for the next one, that means just everybody who really wants to come should basically try to be 10 minutes early.
Yeah, so I don't know if the developers are doing another presentation. My understanding is that that was the community board's limitation with 100 total people. It was also broadcast on Facebook, which I don't know if it was adequate.
Okay.
What I have to be outside of my apartment from 7 to 8. So I'm usually like on my laptop, and then at 8 o'clock, I try and go back to my apartment, and I had to get off and I couldn't get back in. So I just watched it on Facebook, but I know that created a significant problem where a lot of community residents who wanted to attend were unable to do so. But the presentation I put together is just a quick PowerPoint, and it's going to detail a lot of the key stuff in the certification relevant to just the housing portion. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so the most immediate kind of just overview is where exactly the 960 Franklin proposed site will be. As you can see, it's right there on the corners of Montgomery, Franklin, and Washington Avenue. It's going to be kind of bordered in by the shuttle train tracks, which run right next to it. So that's the proposed site that's being proposed by the developers. So for the most immediate relevant portion for the housing committee is how they're approaching the affordable housing units. They're approaching it through a process, what's called mandatory inclusionary housing. The first bullet point I pulled specifically from the city's own definition of what mandatory inclusionary housing is. It's basically a tool by the city to get developers to create affordable units in exchange for tax credits and more favorable zoning, upzoning for the developers. So instead of being able to build as of right, or even attempting to do a rezoning to get a few more floors, they're able to build significantly higher and bigger than what would otherwise be the case in exchange for affordable units. So essentially it's kind of the city extracting that as a cost of upzoning the development. So this is just kind of a quick list of some of the pros and cons of the mandatory inclusionary housing. Some of the pros that it creates more affordable units, creates greater overall supply of housing, influx of economic development, and increase of commercial space. However, there are significant cons associated with mandatory inclusionary housing. The most immediate one is the ability for developers to then build outside the context of the immediate neighborhood. In this instance, this particular development aims to be about 37 stories, nearly twice as high as any of the immediate buildings in the immediate area, and nearly 3 times as high or 4 times as high as the immediate residential buildings and some of the pre-war buildings in the area. So it is going to be extremely visible and out of place and out of character for the neighborhood. I believe we're in R5. I can't remember the exact zoning for most of the neighborhood, but the current zoning for the area in South Crown Heights limits developments to about 8 floors total. And so that's why most of the housing around here is oftentimes only 6, 7, 8 floors. And this was done in the 90s to protect the character of the neighborhood. Another particular issue with the mandatory inclusionary housing is that AMI, or what's known as area median income, I will go over that a little bit more in depth in the next slide, is a deeply flawed metric that doesn't really account for the actual income in the immediate neighborhood. Other issues that have arose are that developers often skimp on the affordable units. They're often placed in lower floors with made with cheaper materials. So some are cheaper appliances. So some market rate units will get, brand new, nice appliances, and then the affordable units will then have cheaper appliances, cheaper floors, cheaper amenities. And there's also been controversial issues of the what's called the quote unquote poor door, where affordable units are placed in a different part of the building and have a separate entrance from the market rate. Another particular issue is that it increases the displacement of long-time residents. The lottery distribution, which is how these units are distributed through NYC Housing Connect, unfortunately favors those who don't need as much help finding affordable housing. So if you're moderate income, you're much more likely to be able to win a lottery. For instance, I've won the lottery 4 separate times, and that is not an anomaly. It's almost by design. People who are middle or moderate income, such as myself, are incredibly favored in these lottery housing programs, and it's much easier to win the housing lottery if you're upper moderate income than if you're low income. And so it creates an issue where those who need it the most have the hardest time getting this housing. And then piggybacking off of that, it subsidizes moderate to high income, middle income housing without providing further demand, or for the higher demand for low income housing. So essentially, people who already have means and have an ability to find housing are the ones being favored, and those who need it the most are being disfavored. Okay, next slide. So this is from the actual certification. This is what the breakdown of the total affordable units will be for purposes of the certification. And so right now, from their table showing what their proposal is under the certification, 20% of the total units will be for 50% AMI, which is about 315 units. 10% will be for 80% AMI, 10% for 100%, and then apologies, and then 10% for 120% of AMI. So the 3/4 of the total amount of units available for, actually, I'm sorry, that would be 60% of the total affordable units would be for 80% AMI and higher. And I highlight that because it's important to know what AMI actually signifies. And so out of all of the total affordable the total units in the entire building, 50% would be under what they call affordable units that are restricted to the AMI bands. Additionally, the developer mentioned workforce housing, which is outside of the housing lottery or mandatory inclusionary housing system. They get additional tax credits to do below market rate housing However, most of the workforce housing targets upper moderate income, oftentimes higher than even 120% of AMI. So what is the actual AMI? This is a word that gets thrown around quite a bit in the context of the development and the proposed rezoning. And I think it's a fair assumption to go ahead and start with just what this actually means. So this is pulled from New York City's Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development. And so this table is set by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is a federal department. And so they set aside these bands based on family size and what constitutes the percentage of the area median income. So as you can see, 50% for a family of four is around 56,850, which generally tends to match the actual area median income of the immediate neighborhood here in Crown Heights. However, that only constitutes about 40% of the affordable units. The majority, 60% of the affordable units, are going to be above the 80 at or above the 80% AMI threshold, which for a family of four is $90,000 or close to $91,000, and for a family of one, for an individual, that would be close to $64,000. It's important to also note that these aren't precise numbers when done in the housing lottery. They're oftentimes done in income bands. So even though somebody may be making $66,000 or $67,000, they may still qualify as a single person. They may still qualify for the 80% AMI. It's not a strict cutoff. And so, you can quickly see that, 10% of the units are for 120% AMI. And for a family of four, that's $136,000, which is significantly above what most folks make here. And so it means that a large proportion of the housing that's being proposed in this particular development is going to be significantly over the income for most of the immediate residents. And so here's a quick definition by the Department of Housing and Urban Development of what each income band for AMI means. So anything 80% or below is considered low income. 0 to 30% is extremely low income. 31 to 50 is very low income. And so while 50% or 40% of the total units proposed would fall under the low income guidelines, it's important to note that 60% of the units, or the majority of the units, would fall under the moderate to middle income bands. So that means that the majority of the housing is not for low income folks. It's going to be for moderate to middle income. Some particular issues with the AMI and how they set the affordability for these apartments. The AMI is aggregated from the entire metropolitan area. So what that means is that this number that they come up with, and what you saw in those previous charts, is pulled from data that includes Westchester, Nassau, Suffolk, Rockland counties, Bergen County, all of these counties that are outside of New York City, often wealthier, whiter, and don't reflect the immediate socioeconomic status of the area where the site is being developed. And so you can end up with a development based or affordable housing that's based on an AMI that grossly does not correspond with the actual AMI in a particular neighborhood. And so it's difficult to get exact numbers on the AMI for South Crown Heights that are official, since HUD only does the overall metropolitan area. Sorry, hold on one second, I lost my train of thought. So the actual AMI of South Crown Heights is probably closer to around, from what I've seen and been able to look at from some census tract data, which is not as reliable. It tends to be about $45,000 for a family of 4 to about $50,000 for a family of 4, which is close to the actual 50% AMI numbers. So some of the key takeaways, 315 units at an AMI 50% is going to be around $56,000 for a family of 4. That's around 40% of all the affordable units that are being proposed. 158 units are going to be at 80% AMI, which is nearly $91,000 for a family of 4. That's going to be about a fifth or 20% of the total affordable units. The next band is the 158 units at 100% of AMI. So that is 113,000 or close to 114,000 for a family of 4 and close to 80,000 for a family of 1. This is going to be 20% of the affordable units. And then the next band is 158 at 120% of AMI, which is going to be near $136,000 for a family of 4 or nearly $96,000 for a family of 1. And so you can quickly see that a lot of these units, when you put the numbers down, are going to go to significantly higher income, higher moderate income to middle income folks who oftentimes don't live in the district or don't live in this particular neighborhood. And so it's important to note that 40% of all the affordable units are going to be for those making $80,000 or more a year, which is a significant amount of money, far more than I would say even most working professionals in the city make, unless they're in particular professions that pay higher. As a nonprofit attorney myself, working at a civil rights nonprofit, these units are, outside of even my income band, and I'm an attorney with a graduate degree. So I think that kind of puts in context a little bit how unaffordable a lot of these units actually will be. And so there's a few key unknowns and particularly with regards to the housing portion of the certification that we don't know yet. We don't know the sizes of the apartments. Obviously, if all of the 50% income apartments are studio and 1 bedrooms, they're not going to help the people that need it the most, which is primarily low-income folks with families and children. And because there just aren't going to be as many apartments available. So there's no details on whether they're going to be 1, 2, 3 bedroom or studio apartments, and what the breakdown is going to be and whether the sizes are going to be the same. I will say the developer said that they're sometimes required to build the units even bigger for the affordable units because of requirements from the city. Don't know how true that is. That's, so take that with a grain of salt. There's no guarantee that affordable units will have access to amenities enjoyed by the other market rate tenants. A lot of these newer buildings will tend to have business centers, gyms, rooftops with barbecue grills and furniture on the roof, and even playrooms, movie theaters, all kinds of amenities for the market rate tenants. There is no written guarantee that affordable unit tenants would have equal access to these, or if they would have to pay a separate fee. Commonly, a lot of buildings will charge a separate fee for the amenities to affordable rate units, which can sometimes be substantial and not affordable for the people who are low income. And so they may live in a building, but they can't enjoy the same amenities, and therefore they have kind of a second-class tenancy of the building. One thing that I did notice during the presentation last week and buried kind of in a footnote was that the parking garages, which are mandated as part of the zoning, buildings of this size are required to have on-site parking. The affordable unit tenants would not have access to the parking garages. So this is already kind of an immediate red flag and sign of whether or not the affordable unit tenants would have access to the amenities. They're pushing to have a community preference in housing lotteries, and while this is generally kind of a noble intention to make sure that community residents are favored in the housing lottery, there is a questionable legal status around these community preferences, because oftentimes a lot of these affordable housing units are being built in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods. And because of the community preference, those who need the housing the most are oftentimes locked out of other affordable housing lotteries in places like Manhattan, where a lot of development still goes on. And so there's currently pending federal civil rights lawsuits in federal court challenging the legality of the community preference. And given the nature of litigation and how long this project may come around, we don't know if this is still going to be around by the time that if this were to be approved and go forward, whether or not there would be even a community preference available at that time. And then on top of that, what the income requirements would be for the workforce housing. I've looked at similar programs across the city, predominantly in Long Island City, at workforce housing. This is primarily aimed at middle income working professionals. And so typically aims at people making, anywhere from $90,000 to about $150,000 a year. And so, there's no exact details, but this is obviously not aimed at people who actually work and live in the immediate community in Crown Heights. So it's just bringing in further people from outside the community and could potentially continue to increase displacement by bringing in more higher income folks who then subsequently increase the prices of everything in the area, from groceries to restaurants and everything else. So that's the immediate takeaway that I got from reading and looking over the certification as it pertains to housing. I feel like I've talked substantially, particularly about this, so I kind of want to open the floor for other people, for others to chime in and speak about what their concerns are, and see what what the main issues with the housing as proposed would be. So is there anybody who would like to speak up on this particular issue?
I guess I don't have so much a question. Well, maybe I'll meander my way toward a question. I've been sort of a passive observer of housing politics and economics in the city for a while, and it seems like it's very polarized, and I don't hear many people saying, this right here is actually the way you're supposed to do it. They did it correctly right here, and everyone not necessarily agrees, but there was a general consensus that this was a housing success. What should be done in your opinion? I think you've studied it a lot more than I have. What is both desirable for the city and financially achievable for a developer?
Right. I'm not a housing expert by any means. I've definitely studied my share of housing development. My personal opinion, outside of being the chair of this committee, is that the apartments that are being pushed out as affordable aren't affordable for the community, and target far too many people who are high moderate income. And so, I think it perpetuates systemic inequality and lack of equity and access to affordable housing, because, you know, as we know, people in that kind of moderate income band tend to be the most politically engaged, and oftentimes, sorry, I don't mean to say it in that way, but I mean, when they show up angry, you know, a nonprofit attorney or a nurse or somebody else who is in a moderate income band, and they call their representatives, they're going to be listened to traditionally a lot more than people who are low income and don't necessarily have the time to engage in civic activity. And so, you know, I view that the targeting of moderate income is a way to mollify political blowback. And instead of tackling the real problem. I mean, when you look at the actual numbers, you know, there was one affordable housing development, I believe it was in Gothamist, I can't remember the exact, but you know, there was one development that I believe had like four units available in the housing, and 80,000 people applied in the housing lottery. And it was one of the only ones targeted at 30% AMI. And so you're talking about people who are at the very low income, extremely low income, typically fixed income from either disability, SSI, SSD, or a pension or something like that, where it's a very fixed income and they really have no other opportunity. I mean, SSI is $780 a month, which roughly is about, you know, just under $9,000. It's just around $9,000 for one person. You're talking about like almost under 10% of AMI, and people like that who are in the most need for housing don't have access. And so, you know, for me, nothing should be offered above 50% AMI. These should be offered at 30%, 20%, 50%. People who actually need this housing, and I think that's the particular issue that I find with this. You know, and so, you know, like I mentioned during the presentation earlier, I've won the housing lottery 4 times. I gave up one apartment. I was about ready to sign the lease so I could stay on this community board, because it was outside of the community board. And 2 others were so far that it didn't make any sense. They were in Queens, and another was in Manhattan, and I was waitlisted. But that shouldn't be the case, right? Like, you know, like for someone like me who's moderate income, it shouldn't be the case that I win the lottery 4 times and there's people who are coming out of shelter who desperately need housing and they can apply to 30, 40 different lotteries and never win once. I mean, and I think that's just kind of an immediate stark example of the particular issue. So in terms of a solution, I think the AMI needs to be 50% below. I don't think anything should be targeted at moderate income folks who already have plenty of options for housing.
What is the mechanism for forcing that?
I mean, ultimately, a lot of this, you know, often goes on behind the scenes. You know, a lot of this is talks with political leaders to see what is doable. I don't know what has been said between Lori Cumbo's office, because ultimately she's responsible for whether or not this gets passed in the city council. But oftentimes there's, you know, back rooms where they negotiate what they can get. And, you know, they focus on, well, 50% is affordable units, but, you know, they don't talk about who it's affordable for. And then not only that, even when you do have affordable units, targeted at 30% of AMI. The lottery system itself is an insane barrier to access these apartments. They ask you for 6 months of bank statements. Oftentimes people who are low income don't even have access to banking. They're underbanked. They ask for 6 months of pay stubs and that you have like, you know, a year of work history. Well, if you're low income, you're more likely to have multiple jobs or lower paying jobs and working part-time, or, you know, just a higher variability in income. And then they start asking for documents like social security cards, birth certificates, affidavits from roommates, copies of leases, copies of like, I mean, the sheer amount of documentation and paperwork required is oftentimes extremely difficult. And that's if you have access to a computer and quick access to all of these things. If you're a senior and you're elderly, you likely don't have access to a computer and don't have the ability to access these things. So there's already a lot of inequities built into the lottery system, and then you add into that a system that's built to mainly benefit moderate income folks who already have housing options.
And the lottery system is that process you were just describing that's managed by the city, correct? Not by a developer doing it their own way.
So yes, so it's not the city, they contract out,
Okay.
but it's not done by developers. So the developers themselves aren't able to like check on the, it's usually done by these contracting agencies.
Got it. Okay.
And it can vary wildly. I mean, I had two experiences where I actually put an application in. One, I went in, there was dozens of people coming in. It was all the way out in East New York. And, you know, it was just some random basement building. And then there was just like, I looked in the back and there were dozens of people working there and just stacks and stacks and stacks and stacks of paperwork. And it took 6 months for them to process my paperwork. And then the second time I went to another place that was based in Williamsburg, and it took them like a week. And so there's like all kinds of issues with like certain, how they process these applications, how they work with folks, and how those things come up. So, there's still a lot of issues. I think the city redesigned their entire website to make it more accessible, but it's still a particular issue.
Last question. The other plans that the developer put out last week or 2 weeks ago, do those have any standing as not standing? Do they have? Is there any formal review of those yet, or is that just simply a gesture by the developer?
Yeah, I mean, the question was asked, like, how do we actually act on that? Like, the certification before the community board is for the full 7-story building, with the shadow on the botanical gardens and just a massive building. And then they say, well, here, look at this compromised building, right? But it's like, that's not what's before the community board. That's not what's been certified. That's not what's gone through review with the city. So, I think it's just to try and make it in line with the other buildings, like I forget what the name of the towers are there. I think something towers, and then the Ebbets Field apartments, which are of similar height, and so it wouldn't stick out nearly as much. But they're basically saying, well, there won't be as many affordable units, and it was kind of like, it feels a little extortionate, which says like you either give up your community or you don't get affordable housing. And then there was a third proposal for as of right, which is basically, this is what we can build regardless of the rezoning. And they're basically saying this is basically it's their bluff that basically says like, we can just go ahead and build here without any affordable housing. Which may legally be true, but they're foregoing significant amount of profits on the development, right, foregoing the rezoning. And so, and at least then, like even if they, I think it's worth calling their bluff, even if they did as of right, like it's within the character of the neighborhood, at least for the most part. It's an 8-story building, it's not going to bring in thousands and thousands of new residents into an area that like we don't even know how it's going to impact the subways, how it's going to impact everything else. But our focus is strictly on the housing portion. So yeah, I don't really know. So that's why I wanted to focus specifically on the housing component and of the certified proposal.
Got it. Thank you. It's a very professional presentation too. Thanks for the time you put into it.
of course.
Yeah, Alexandra, this is Leslie. I want to thank you very much for the presentation. It is really an eye opener. Some of the concerns I have are, as you say, it is out of scale, for the neighborhood, and it is also where will these people get groceries, and how will it affect subways? But but just to get to the housing, it concerns me. It concerns me that the people that the affordable housing folks would not have access to the parking garages when some of the people who need affordable housing most are actually living in their cars. So if you don't have a place to put your, if you don't have access to the place where you currently have all your belongings, it's not. It really says you're dealing with a two-tier, very much a two-tier system. I'm also concerned about housing. How are they going to, or what efforts will be made to keep all those high rises from becoming Airbnbs? Because that happens in so many neighborhoods, especially where there are high rises rather than, smaller buildings where you tend to know you tend to know your neighbors, and a smaller building encourages people to know their neighbors. How will these high rises not become or be prevented from becoming, Airbnbs for wealthier people who are just coming for a few days a week?
It's a good question. I imagine that the landlord would probably want to limit those, but we don't have any guarantee or any kind of written statement of what their policy would be. And even still, like, it can be really hard. Obviously the person who's renting out Airbnb, right now it's not, obviously happening because of the pandemic, but in a year, 2 years, 3 years, it'll obviously be back. But, in particular, there are folks that may not do it. It's really easy to catch the folks that do it every single day and have new people coming in all the time, particularly since there's a doorman, and that's oftentimes how these buildings regulate it. But, somebody comes in and is like, I travel a lot, so once a month I'm going to rent out my apartment for Airbnb and have somebody stay there for a weekend, and it has a view of the Botanical Gardens and Prospect Park. And obviously something like that in a new building could easily fetch like a few $100s a night. And so like that would subsidize them paying a market rate apartment that they likely wouldn't have been able to afford in the first place. And so, that's been driving a lot of these, the rise in housing prices, is that people are turning to second sources of income through Airbnb to subsidize their housing. And particularly at the higher end, like, that drives these obscene high prices of like $5,000 for a 2-bedroom. And so I don't know what the developers have in mind to stop it. I just know from a practical reality, oftentimes in buildings like that, it's hard because you have a doorman and everybody has to check in. And even though like people might not know their neighbors, the doormen tend to recognize the people in the building, and get to know the people in the building. So that's just been my experience. But obviously it could be wrong. And I don't know what the developer has in mind for that.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any particular comments on the housing portion?
Again, the breakdown and the income figures, are problematic, because the largest number, of affordable housing is going to the highest, the highest of the income.
Yeah. Yeah, it's particularly problematic. Well, if nobody has any other immediate comments or questions, I can detail what the process is. We were supposed to have a meeting, I believe, between some of the committee chairs. I mean, ultimately, the approval recommendation that gets forwarded to the full board goes through ULURP. But we can, it goes through ULURP, but we can ultimately, issue our recommendation to, as a committee to ULURP on what we view the housing aspect of it to be and what our opinion is on the housing aspect. And so, we could vote on a resolution, particularly expressing the committee's viewpoint on the housing aspect of the proposed rezoning to recommend to ULURP, because ultimately by the bylaws, the recommendation and the process goes through them. So we have just an advisory role in the whole entire process, but I think it's vitally important since there are so many aspects. Like we've now spent close to nearly 50 minutes or an hour just discussing the affordable housing portion, and that's not even including all the other aspects like transportation, public safety, environment, and all of the other committees that are affected by this rezoning. And so I think it's important to be able to at least help inform ULURP on some of these more particular issues. We do have quorum, so we have 2 committee members, Matthew and Nellie, and then as well as the community resident, Migdalia. So we do have quorum. Matthew and Manala, would you both be interested in adopting a recommendation or resolution stating the position of the committee on the affordable housing?
I think so. I mean, it sounds, well, I guess what are the options there? Like, yes, no, is this like is this an up or down position? Because it's obviously it's complex.
Right.
And this is like, aside from a renovation on Fenimore Street regarding a chain link fence, this is my first rodeo with this. So I don't know. I don't know what it looks like from here.
Right. I think it would be if we can get a little more. I know I was at the last meeting, but for even Matthew to catch up and we get a little more information where we can truly say, yes, this is what we are, because it was intense with all the question and answers at the last meeting. So we didn't get much of an in-depth as to where this is going. So maybe if we can formalize something where we could look to see once ULURP is done and we can go over the housing portion, then it would be at our next meeting, I think better for us to come up with something more concrete.
Right.
For living.
Okay.
What was that?
Did somebody else try and say something?
Maybe that was an accidental unmute. Yeah.
Yeah, my only concern is the time frame. I want to be able to, before the next ULURP meeting, when they go over, the particulars to give it an up or down recommendation for the full community board. I want to be able to at least, inform them of the official housing committee's position on the housing aspect, and help them inform their position. I feel like I'm.
Do you want to draft something, or do you want to put that presentation in and send it out so we could, do a little more research? That would be okay. And we could reconvene or have a call before.
Yeah, so,
Okay,
well, so here's what I can do. I can email that out, and I can make sure that, the CB9 office, make sure it gets it out to the committee members.
right.
To just go over the particular details. I will get more, we were supposed to have a meeting among the committee chairs at 6 today. Unfortunately, we did not. It was canceled last minute. I was hoping to get more details so I could come in here and say like what the process will be. So hopefully I will be able to then get more details on the timing of the process and how this should work with all the committees. And then that'll give everyone a little bit more time to review the particulars. I just will remind the committee members that our focus is solely on housing, so other concerns about impacts on transportation, the environment, or anything else should be addressed with those relevant committees. And then ultimately when it goes before ULURP, that's the place where those go. And then obviously before the full community board, which at this point, I don't know if it'll be this March meeting that it'll go before. I don't know the full timing. I know we have 60 days, but that 60-day clock didn't start until mid-February. So that could put it until end of April. So we may have the April community board meeting to issue a final recommendation. I don't know the exact timeline. So I will work on that. I will send out, make sure to get out the presentation to everyone, and we can take more time. If we need to reconvene before, just as a matter of getting our recommendation to ULURP and making the time frame, I'll let the committee members know. I'm hoping that won't be the case, but we'll see. Is there any other thoughts or concerns about moving forward?
No, I think that would work. And that's a big focus for us, really. And once we get it, then we can, make an informed decision. I think that's a big push for us to get that done.
Okay. And just from a kind of temperature taking, what is kind of your between Nellie, between you and Matthew, what are your initial takes on this particular on the housing component? Just kind of first reactions or quick opinions, I guess, on this. So I have an understanding of where the committee is.
Well, is the affordability and the units. We're not sure as to where we're going and how many units there are right now. I mean, we got one proposal and now it's changed. So it's kind of, a moving target. So we just need to get the information where we can safely say yes, and make that decision as far as, because with the community, it's important that we do have the affordability in there.
I would echo that. I tried reading the EIS, and it was just full of the developer may do this, the developer will consider doing that. And look, I'm sure it's hard to build something, but if we're being asked to state our position on what they plan to do, we need to know what they plan to do. And like Nellie said, it seems like it is a moving target. Maybe it's not as moving as it seems, but I sure have the impression that it's moving a lot.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I think you're correct. Once they re-up zone, they can change, any of these particular details. As long as it remains within the zone upzoning. And so, certain things like parking, height requirements, things like that, those, can be adjusted as long as it's within the zoning, but not vastly so. But and I think the AMI is like, a precondition as part of mandatory inclusionary housing, so they can't renege on that portion on the affordable housing. But yeah, and you are correct. There has been a long history of developers over-promising and overselling and under-delivering on their promises to communities. Okay, so I think, unless anyone else had any other particular comments, What I'll make sure is next steps, I will get more information from the chair of the committee board, Fred, and the other committees to see what the exact timeline is. I will make sure that the presentation goes out widely so you can stay informed. Amy, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, hi. I'm sorry I was late to join. I wanted to join, but I had to zoom up to the Bronx, slow train to the Bronx. Anyway, I had two things. I just caught a couple of the last comments that you made, and I had two observations. One, going back to the what Matthew said, the caveat here, and I know Alicia is big on this, but there's other people also. It does not matter what the developer says they may do. If it's not in what I think it's their application to the planning board, if it's not specified there, then you basically should vote it down and have them resubmit the application to something that's specific to what you want. Because anything that they say they may do, and that's all the talk was that last week during the ULIP committee says, oh, we're offering the second thing, but I don't think anybody saw it in their written document that's legally binding. So that's just one caution. And then the second one, I was curious about, you said the way this development may impact other areas like transportation and such, that you're not going to speak to it because it's strictly a housing issue. I was just curious because although housing is, you know, you're interested in affordable housing, how many units, where they are, I'm not seeing how you divorce housing from location. Like, it's not just, you know, a front door and a bedroom and a living room. It's a living condition. So you're building housing, and it does have impact on your environment. So you can't go too broad. I understand that, but I don't think you can eliminate other conditions or other areas. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah, and in the presentation earlier, one of the key questions that I think that remains unknown is, you know, the particular aspects of housing. Like, they're saying they have access, you know, these are the income bands and these are the number of units, but there's no breakdown of what type of apartments. Are they studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms? What's the quality of the apartments? You know, will they have access to amenities? Like, all these additional things that would help us inform our choice. We don't really have any access to that. All we have is just income data. And then, you know, obviously quality of life and in particular aspects. I think that you raise a valid point. You know, and I don't know how much, you know, some of this is like a Venn diagram and there's overlapping areas, but like the quality of housing for the people in the immediate area, people across the street who may not be in a shadow most of the day, or, you know, their impact on affordability and stuff like that. So, you know, I don't think any of this is in a vacuum. I'm just trying to keep it within the narrow confines of our committee's focus. Unless there's anything else, I think that should be it for today. Again, I'll go and get a better sense of the timeline and process from the other committee chairs and the chair of the committee board. I will circulate the presentation for anybody who missed it or was not able to see it. And if you have any other comments, suggestions, or just kind of general observations about this development, please feel free to email me. I'll put my personal email in the chat, and I believe the community board members should also have access to my email address from every community board meeting email. So please feel free to reach out to me. You know, I look forward to hearing from everyone and moving forward with this process. Okay, with no other comments, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, there is.
Walk close to you,
Second.
where we can feel your presence and your anointing. Lord, help us not to be distracted by the distraction.
I want to thank everyone for taking the time. And I will see you all at the full community board meeting. Have a good evening.
Thank you as always.
Bye.
You too.